All right, today we're going to talk about space. And if you have been taking my class, you've probably heard this speech several times before, but I'll get into more detail today about space. Space is the emptiness or area between, around, above, below, or within objects. Negative space is the empty area around shapes and forms. And the positive space is are the actual shapes and forms. It's usually the subject of a work of art. So in this painting right here, where is the negative space? Well, that would be the area around the girl. And then where is the positive space? That would be the girl. So the positive space is the subject, and it's also the form or the figure. We're going to talk about the figure ground relationship. Uh, the figure is the same thing as positive space, and the ground is the same thing as negative space. So, in this painting by Edward Hopper, there is a strong figure ground relationship, and that's because it is easy to identify what is the empty space or the negative space and what is the positive space. In this painting, what's the positive space? It's the building. What's the negative space? Is the area around the building. It's the sky. So it's easy to tell. The Cubists in the 20th century started to play with the figure ground relationship, and they started making it impossible to tell what was the figure and what was the empty space around the figure. So this is a painting of a guitar player, and if you have a trouble seeing it, it is the head of the figure is in this area right here. You can see the shoulders of the person holding. This is probably an elbow, or this might be the elbow. I'm not sure. This is the upper arm. This might be the lower arm. And there's like a semblance of a guitar here. And then these complicated shapes right here could be the hands strumming on the guitar. Now, what the Cubists did to make it difficult to tell what was the figure and what was the negative space or the figure ground relationship is that they made everything the same color. All right. And then they didn't close the shapes. So you see that there's lines here, but there's no closing of the lines. Like this shape up here in the upper right hand corner, it almost looks like a rectangle that's missing two of its sides. And so, does that belong? Is it this might be a shoulder? It might not be. I don't know. It's not connected. So the color can just kind of fades out, and these shapes don't quite close in on each other. So we don't know where actually the figure begins and the ground ends, or the figure ends and the ground begins. It's all just kind of blended in together. And so that's a figure ground relationship. And you can see here in this codex by the Aztecs or the Mayans, Aztecs, I think, that it is difficult to tell where one figure ends and another begins. And also there's parts where it's hard to tell where the background is and and then the figure is. So there's a very weak figure ground relationship here because it's a little bit confusing as to where the figure actually ends. Large negative spaces around positive shapes or positive shapes give a lonely feeling. So, like a painting like this, we have a lot of empty space and it gives a lonely feeling. Lots of Edward Hopper paintings feel very lonely in them. And we can see that in the mosaics where it has this very empty background. It should be like a blue sky or a field or some foliage of some sort, but no, it's empty. It's this gold color, and the people feel very lonely or isolated and lost in there. When positive shapes are crowded together, it gives the feeling of tension or chaos. Right? And I ask my students, can you find the elephants in this painting right here? It's a very complicated painting, and how can you miss an elephant? Elephants are so big, but there are the elephants right there, and you wouldn't be able to see them because there's all this chaos happening in there. It's a very crowded and overpopulated painting, and we get that a lot. I think in the class I use the term horror vacui, but artists kind of play on this set. Like this painting right here, I know this is not from the first semester, but this painting right here, there's they're in a pool. They have all their little floaties. Everything about this screams fun, except for how many people there are. This amount of people makes things unfun. But they're all like, if you had a floaty on and you were in a pool, you are prepared to have fun. But how can you have fun when there's so many people here? And here again, these are examples of things being overcrowded. So some people like an empty space, and some people like a cluttered space. Some people feel very lost or like alone or isolated if they have a large empty space in their home. So they fill it up with stuff. And some people feel very claustrophobic in a place that has lots of extra knickknacks and all kinds of extra things in it. So when we look at the Ludovisi battle sarcophagus, it is definitely overcrowded and quite writhing with energy and movement. I almost liken it to like when you kick over an ant's nest and all the ants are kind of moving around. It's the same kind of energy and movement that you see here in this painting or this sculpture. In a lot of artwork from this first semester, they have really just filled up every little space with figures and objects. So here we have the second coming of Christ, and we have uh, people going to hell, people going to heaven, and all kinds of interesting things going on. And so that is a crowded space. Again, like I said, this is very common in the first semesters to have all this space that is crowded. The Aztecs did it as well. They filled in all the empty space with stuff. So many artworks that we see first semester that are absolutely filled with subjects and objects. Hardly any empty spaces in the first semester. Some artists create positive and negative spaces that reverse themselves to confuse the viewer. MC Escher certainly does that. He plays tricks on the mind with the orientation of various things, and we can see that here. That we are our point of view of this relief sculpture is that we are like above them and into the crowd, but we are looking at them at these figures straight on. Like it is a it is a celebration. It's a festival where the horses go around the army or the soldiers in the middle, and so it's almost like a parade. But we're looking at it from a straight on point of view. It's almost as if these are all like toy soldiers that are laying down on the ground, and then we're looking at them like that. It's a very twisted kind of point of view. Uh, One kind of sculpture is a freestanding sculpture. That's a work of art that is surrounded by negative space, like the Statue of Liberty. It's not even like walls in the background to box her in. She is completely free of anything around her. And so, we start there's so much of this in the first semester. We see like the Kouros and the Kore, the Greek bronzes, the marble copies of the Greek bronzes. So much of the Greek sculpture that we looked at is in the round or freestanding. Again, with Mesopotamia, we saw some sculptures in Africa and Mexico in the Paleolithic era. And then the opposite of a freestanding sculpture would be a relief sculpture. That's sculpture that is carved into a wall or a flat surface. It barely sticks out. And there's two kinds of relief. There's low relief that hardly sticks out from the wall at all. And then there's high relief that comes out very far from the wall. And so we've looked at over this semester of the first semester, we've seen a lot of relief sculpture. We see it in uh, uh, the Palette of Narmer and in the Assyrian relief sculptures. And these are very low relief. The Palette of Narmer is very low relief. This is a little bit of a higher relief. This is very high relief. You can see the low relief out on the sides of this photograph. And then in the center, this face that comes out at us is in high relief. We can see the relief sculpture in the stele of Hammurabi. Here we can see a combination of low relief and high relief. In the in between the figures here, there's very low relief, but the actual figures that we are looking at are in high relief. Some more relief. Like I said, there's relief sculpture all over the first semester. And even in the non-Western traditions, we can see the relief sculpture. So, how do artists create the illusion of three dimensions on a two-dimensional surface? And they use, and the answer to that is shading, but the fancy art word is called chiaroscuro, and it's shading from light to dark, but it's the same thing as shading or blending. So, in this painting by Leonardo da Vinci, which part looks the most realistic? And it's the hands. The hands look most realistic because they have the most shading on them. And so, why is that? It's because of chiaroscuro. And we see this in the Roman mural paintings of their still lifes. We get a very strong sense of light and dark and shading, and where you can see that the Romans are looking at where the light is hitting the vases and objects and fruit, and where there's a shadow on it. I think this is incredibly advanced for an ancient civilization, and we don't really see that kind of attention to making things look round or on a two-dimensional surface until we get to the late um, uh, uh, part of the first semester, where we're just beginning to get into the Renaissance, that late medieval era, especially up in Italy. The highlights and shadows on the clothes and faces of these people really give a sense of light and dark. And how do artists create the illusion of three dimensions on a two-dimensional surface? Another way they do it is by perspective, and the perspective is the method for creating the illusion of depth on a 2D surface. So, which of these two photographs looks more spacious? Which world would you rather live in? And for me, I would rather live in the world of the picture on the bottom, because it looks like I could go back into space. If I was living in the picture that is above, I'd be flat. I would be paper thin. Hello. So artists show deep space by using perspective. In the picture above, it's as if I would be on a wall or a ledge on the side of a building that you see a lot in television. Or these teenagers in the lower right hand photograph are all standing up against the wall, and you can imagine if there was no space in front of them, that they were stuck there on the wall. That's what it's like to live in the Egyptian artworks. So we want to look at artworks that have that sense of space in them, right? That are using perspective, and I don't know why these are in. So one, part of that perspective means that we have a background, a middle ground, and a foreground. So the background is the part of the picture that appears furthest away from the viewer, and that is like the sky, those trees, and those hills. That is the background. That's way back there. The foreground is the part of the picture that appears closest to the viewer, and that is the large people down at the bottom of the picture. And then the middle ground is the area between the foreground and the background. So the foreground, middle ground, and background helps us to feel like there's space in there, like it's realistic. It's a realistic space that we can adventure out into, and we could see that here where the foreground we have the tree and the fence that is in our foreground. And then the middle ground is the foliage behind that tree. Whoops. And in the background, you can see the hills, the skies, maybe the clouds back there. So that is one way of creating space. Here again, we can see the foreground, the middle ground, and the background. In the foreground, we have these farmers or peasants working on the land. And then in the middle ground back here, there's some of the hills that we see. There's a little bit more detail than in the background, but we can see some things that are going on in the middle ground. And then in the background, we like as the hills get smaller and smaller back there, and we can see the sky. That is all in the background. And the Romans tried to create this illusion of foreground, middle ground, and background in their murals as well. So there are 6 devices for perspective. And the first device is overlapping. I ask my students which of these 2 boxes or which of these 2 squares feels like it's closer to us. And then the answer they always pick is because it's the darker one, or the one on the lower right. And that's because it overlaps the other one. So where do you see overlapping in this painting? And you can see it here. The person in the yellow and blue is closer to us than the person in the red because they overlap the person in the red. And you can see overlapping a lot in the ancient world of the art of the ancient world that we looked at. So to make things look like they're in front, they overlap. One culture that does not overlap, that would be the Egyptians. Those early Egyptians, everything is just side by side, and very rarely do things overlap in the Egyptian art. But you can see lots of overlapping here, especially with the angels. You can tell which angels are closer to us, those are the ones that are down lower in the picture, and which angels are farther away. Those are higher up in the picture. And here is one of the few Egyptian images that shows this overlapping. Like this girl right here has her arms up is closer to us than the girl that has her arms down.
Good afternoon, Sioux Falls. We have a few cars that need to be moved off the band practice line immediately or they will be towed. We have a white BMW RRJ 5145, a white Ford sedan, a white Kia TDJ 3527, a silver Honda SSH 1956, and a silver Mercury sedan. Those all need to be moved immediately before they're towed. Once again, that's a white BMW, a white Ford sedan, a white Kia, a silver Honda, and a silver Mercury sedan. Please move vehicles immediately. Thank you.
We see a lot of the overlapping in the column of Trajan. The second way that shows perspective is size. Which of these 2 things is closer to us? Well, it's the one on the left because it is bigger. So here we can see a tree in the distance is smaller than a tree that is close to us because as things get closer to us, they look like they get bigger. And you can see the people get bigger as they get closer to us. The hills get bigger as they get closer to us. So that helps us. It helps the artist project the idea of space. Things go back into space. Placement is another way that things can look close or far away. With things that are lower in the picture plane are closer to us than things higher up in the picture plane. So if we compare these 2 people right here, the guy with the yellow and blue is closer to us than the guy in the red because he is lower in the picture plane. The fence or the gate is closer to us because it is lower in our picture plane. The jug of water, the glass, the pitcher of water is closer to us because it is lower in the picture plane. And this one right here, it's a twisted perspective, but the horses that are lower in the picture plane are the closest to us. And then with detail, as things get closer, we can see more details. So we can definitely see that in the trees. When we compare the 2 trees, the tree in the distance is far away and we cannot see the details. And the tree that is on the right, we can see every individual leaf and branch. And because it is close, we can see all of the details. The tree that is closest to us and the tree on the left and this one here on the right that bear fruit, those have a lot more detail than all the ones in the background. So that gives us the impression that they are close or closer to us. The people here in the foreground, you can see the details of their work and what they're doing. And we see the details of the various vegetation that we have around here. And even on these hills in the middle ground, we can see details. But all the hills in the background, we cannot see the details. And then color, which is like atmospheric perspective. I talked about atmospheric perspective when we looked at um, no, I think I talked about it in class. So as things get closer, they get darker. So in the background, we have these hills. They get lighter and lighter, and then the hills that are closer are green. And then if you look at the grass down at the bottom, it's absolutely so dark. I've never seen grass that dark before. But they're trying to give the impression that things are close up, so they had to make the green darker. Um, the trees that are closer to us are more intense in color because they are closer. Um, the As we go into the distance, things get lighter. And then converging lines, that's a linear perspective, and we can see that in this picture right here. That all the lines kind of point towards the same uh, 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 point in the distance. Basically, in this one, they're all pointing to the baby, but it's very typical of Renaissance. If we look at the before the second semester, I can see some of the orthogonal lines or the guidelines are down here and this part of the fence. And I talked in class about how the Romans really tried uh, at linear perspective, but they just weren't ready for it yet. So there was a good, honest attempt at it. It just didn't work out for them. All right, so that'll take us to the end of my discussion of the element of space in this class.